So good evening to all of you. So first, welcome to all of you on this webinar series that we have planned. Just because in this COVID time, everyone is working remotely. So the trainings, education, everything has hampered. So keeping all this in mind and conservation of wild animals, specifically the big cats, we have decided to organize this online webinar series which is scheduled from today, that is September 24, and it will continue till October 22. So on every Thursday, there will be a webinar on different topics covering different aspects of big cat conservation. So in today's webinar, we have our presenter from Singapore, Shri Khalid Pasha ji, and he'll be talking about COVID-19 impact. So before the start of this meeting, let me introduce some facts about our webinar series, how many things we have planned in this webinar series, and then a brief introduction of our project in which we are working on this webinar series. So this webinar series has been planned with the generous support of our funding agencies, that is Ministry of Environment of Republic of Korea, Everland Resort, and also supported by BioBridge initiative of Convention of Biological Resources. The webinar is hosted by Seoul National University, South Korea, Tiger and Leopard Conservation Fund in Korea, and ENPROTEC India Foundation, an NGO based in India. So when we planned this webinar series, we set our target countries. So our target countries were Korea, Russia, India, Bangladesh, China, where actually we do a lot of field research and meetings over in past 3 years. And the target audience included the researchers, scientists, wildlife managers, forest officers, law enforcement agencies, NGOs, students. And since we have been working, so Professor Lee will give you a brief idea about what we have been doing from past 2 years, that is from 2018. So we have been training the people for a long time. And this year, we just wanted to have some more training of these professionals so that the training and learning should continue altogether. So like I mentioned you, so today we have a webinar where Mr. Pasha will be talking about COVID-19 impact on big cat conservation. On October 8th, another webinar will be hosted where we'll be talking about the reintroduction of tigers in India and restoration of tigers and leopards in Land of Leopard National Park of Russia. So Land of Leopard National Park is one of the secured habitat existing now for Amur leopard. So these two talks will be very interesting. Then on October 15, we'll be having a human big cat coexistence webinar where we'll be trying to touch upon the issues of impact of human big cat conflict and how this can be managed. So we have a presentation from Bangladesh by Mr. Nirmal from Bangladesh Forest Department. Then we have a presentation from Russia, and we have a presentation from Korea also by Dr. Lim. So that we can understand how best this kind of a thing is perceived in a society where you don't have big cats. So these are our presenters. So today's presenter, Mr. Pasha, is from WWF Singapore. Then we have Dr. Kim So Kim. He'll be talking in October 22 webinar on the genetic aspects. Dr. Shankar will be talking about the reintroduction of tigers in India. Mr. Nirmal will be talking about conflict issue. Dina from Russia will be talking about on October 8th webinar about the restoration of tigers and leopard in Land of Leopard. Dr. Anya Lim is from Korea, and she'll be talking about the perspectives of conflict and big cats reintroduction in Korea. And Ikarnia, she'll be talking about the conflict issues in Russia. So you can all join different webinar series on different dates from October 24 to September 24 to October 22. So though we targeted some countries within an Asia, but the participants or the audience that we have today now in our webinar are more than that. So we have almost from different parts of Europe and Asia, and most of them are, so gender neutrality is also there. So we have approximately equal share. And when we look into the educational background of our participants, so most of these participants are having the postgraduate and a graduate degree and doctorate degree. So we had a quite intellectual education background participants from different countries. So this webinar is going to be very beneficial for the conservation of big cats in range countries. So I'll request all the participants, so please post all your comments, queries during the presentation and after the presentation, because we'll be having a discussion section post presentation. So your questions will be taken up at that time. And so now, as far as participants are concerned, so these include researchers, scientists, students, veterinarians, wildlife managers, NGO professionals and all. So in today's webinar, we also invited the panelist, Dr. Mukesh Thakur. He's from scientist at Zoological Survey of India in India. And he's basically looking after the long-term monitoring projects across the big landscape in India. So he's leading a big team. So maybe he'll be a very good person in the panel to discuss about the impacts. Also, we have one veterinarian, Dr. Hemant Joshi. He'll be joining us. So with these panelists, then we have one panelist from Korea. So she is also a veterinarian, Dr. Huang. So with all these panelists, we'll have a very nice discussion, I assume. Now I'll request Professor Lee to just discuss and share about what's there about our projects and other activities, and then we'll start a presentation with Mr. Pasha.
Okay, hello everyone. I like to introduce my assistant, Biket. Hello. Hi, welcome everyone from South Korea. This seminar, I'm working at Seoul National University as a professor of biochemistry and conservation genetics. This webinar series is actually part of our project initiated support from CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity. So I may introduce our project with some PowerPoint file. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes, you can see now.
Yes, it's visible.
Hi. This is called Asian Big Cat Conservation through Technology Sharing and the Use of Unified DNA Typing. Dr. Punit Pandey and I serve as principal investigator, and many institutions participate in the program. Okay, and also the CBD runs the BioBridge Initiative program. So initially, we are supported by this program, and still they endorse our program, and financially supported by the Ministry of Environment, and also partially from Everland resort. The big cats you all know, so I omit this, and their threats and their distribution. and conservation actions. Probably everybody knows about that. The scientific community can contribute the conservation of big cats, and the major tool is called a DNA marker called microsatellite. But one of the problem in this marker is that every country and every research group use a different set of markers. So it's not comparable, and it inhibits the sharing data and cooperation between researchers. So we developed a new system called Pamplex. This is a combination of 32 microsatellite markers for big cat species and covers uniform genome, and we can approach in multiplex cost-effective way. So this system, we can reduce the cost and effort to analyze big cat genetics, and we would like share this technique through this project. And so the objective of the project is first training the scientific staff and forest officials of the Asian big cats range countries on different aspects of conservation, genetics, and wildlife forensics, and nurturing the scientific cooperation and synergism among different stakeholders through consensus meeting and joint research to bring uniformity in Asian big cat STR typing methodologies, and undertaking joint scientific research on big cat species using unified DNA typing methodology. But we are not only interested in the genetics, but also interested in conservation biology in general. And so we organized many seminars, workshops, and training and meetings, experiments, and research meetings. And in 2018, we did it in India, many workshops and seminars, and also training. And in 2019, we did the same thing in Bangladesh, and also in Russia. We invited the Russian scientists to Korea, had a seminar, and also they participate in our big ceremony for winners of awarding ceremony for tiger and leopard drawing contest for children. And we also visited Russia to have a tiger summer course, and also doing research and experiments on DNA extraction, and also field investigations and seminars, and also participate in Tiger Day Festival in Vladivostok. It was 2019, but this kind of gathering wouldn't be possible this year because of COVID-19. It's very sorry. And we are working hardly on genetic analysis. So we think we made some kind of basis for a Pamplex network, and we would like to expand this to the whole big cat range countries in the future, and not only contribute the genetics of big cats, but also cultural and sociological and wildlife human interactions and various aspects of big cat conservation. And this seminar series, we hope contribute to building the future network and promote the idea and information exchange between conservationists in different countries. Okay, this is my short presentation on the on our project. Dr. Pendy, could you now introduce today's speaker? Hello. Hello.
Yeah. Is my
Oh,
voice
okay.
audible?
Yeah, we can listen now.
Yeah. Yeah. Could you please stop your screen sharing? Yeah, that will be fine. So our today's speaker, Mr. Khalid Pasha, has a decades-long experience in the conservation of wild animals. Specifically, he expertise in illegal wildlife trade management. He served with Traffic International, and now he is heading the CATS program as a manager in WWF Singapore. So I'll just hand over the screen to Mr. Pasha. So Mr. Pasha, please continue yourself. Thank you. And meanwhile, I'll request all the audiences, please post your comments in the chat box so that we can compile them if you have. Thank you. Please.
I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
So thank you so much, Dr. Puneet and Dr. Lee. And it's my privilege to join this webinar and share some of my experience. I'm not a trained veterinarian like most of the people are on this call, or a geneticist. And I work on conservation in general. And my experience in the last 20 years have been working in protected areas across Asia, Russia, China, and some parts of Latin America, and where I have been working on several conservation issues. So today, what I'm going to share with you is two parts of this presentation. One is, why do we need to talk about illegal wildlife trade, and what is the link between the illegal wildlife trade and the present moments that we are going through, which is emerging as a cause of the wildlife disease. And then I will take you through a small short survey which we conducted as an impact of the COVID on the big cat conservation. So largely that was done across the tiger range, but I think so the results are pretty much would be applicable and in a way similar to, at least if not exactly, to the other big cat conservation areas. So when we talk about illegal wildlife trade, this is no small time business. This is not about dealing with specific trade issues, or this is not for subsistence or for protein for some of the marginalized communities. We are not talking about that kind of a consumptive trade. We are talking about the huge amount of more than $20 billion trade globally, which is worth estimated, and ranging from plethora of species. So it goes across several reptiles, amphibians, arachnids. You look at mammals. So across the animal and the plant kingdom, there are several species which are traded in millions of dollars. And this illegal trade also has a close connection and has been responsible for emergence of many wildlife diseases. Looking at the trade across the globe, if you look at, well, this is just a snapshot of to give you some of the flagship species. We talk about jaguars when we talk about big cats, and jaguars in Latin America, or the lions in Africa, tigers in India and across the parts in Asia and Russia, Far East. The snow leopards, again, ranging from the Central Asia towards the Far East Russian side. Then we have the other flagships and the tigers also going down into Southeast Asia. So all these species, including elephants, rhinos, pangolins, which is the highest traded animal in the world now, it's all going through a severe impact because of this illegal wildlife trade. And the trade doesn't only exist in their body parts, but even in terms of live animals, curios, products of different shapes. So it takes a different forms and shapes where the trade occurs. So I will not go into those details because this is not a talk about wildlife trade, but this is how the trade functions. And there is a huge segment of a trade which is feeding the wet markets. And this is where the whole connection of the wildlife diseases and the trade emerges out. And this has a very close connection also to yet another biggest threat, which I will talk about, is the snaring crisis. And this is a crisis presently sweeping across many parts of the world, including Southeast Asia, which is in a major grip. And we have seen tigers have been exterminated from Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, very recently in last 1 decade. And all have been, they have been snared, the prey has been snared, and it ranges, the snaring ranges from small prey to as large as elephants. And very recently, WWF, working with other partners, released a report on snaring crisis, and in which it was revealed that between 2005 and 2019, more than 12 million snares have been recovered from different protected areas across Asia. Now, this is a huge number and a very conservative estimate. And these snares just range from small kind of rings made from different fabrications, capture in homemade snares, and a major cause of this defaunation across much of the region, costing few pennies and few dollars, but wiping out huge amount of treasures and our natural assets across the globe. So that's, as I said, the wet markets are largely responsible, and you see that different kind of products, animals, live animals, their parts, meat, it comes into these markets. Now, when these animals are captured and they come in close contact, there's a host of pathogens which also get transmitted. There are different kind of infections which they already are carriers with. Unless otherwise, if they would remain within the forest, they would have been there and insulated and keeping us insulated from getting these diseases. But once they enter into the big cities and the wet markets and remote areas, into these wet markets, then the whole story changes. And there's a huge amount of these pathogens are unleashed, and then they create their own devastation and havoc, which is one of the manifestations which we are under now. These are two pictures which I will just talk about briefly. This is one of these seizures which changed the history of tiger conservation and looking at big cat conservation in Asia. This was in 2003 when 31 tiger skins, 581 leopard skins, 778 otter skins, several thousands of claws of big cats were seized across the borders in China. And the consignments have come from South Asia, largely from India, Nepal, and adjoining countries. And this is something which revealed that this trade doesn't function at a small level, but there's a huge amount of a global nexus which is involved into this illegal wildlife trade. When we talk about illegal wildlife trade, we just don't talk about people killing animals, but there's a close nexus between the arms, between money laundering and the wildlife trade. And there have been several reports which have been brought about by different organizations to basically establish these linkages. The other animal, and which has topped the list now globally, being trafficked, is the pangolin. Pangolins, you can see the amount of the animals and the seizures which have taken place. This is like 2019, we had a seizure from this region in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong, 9 tons of pangolins, then 33 tons in Malaysia, 2 tons in Vietnam, 4.2 tons in Uganda, China about again 12 tons, and then there's in 2016, which is again 3 tons. And if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Puneet would correct me, he has worked in Wildlife Institute and he must have seen a lot of samples. One scale of a pangolin will weigh about 10 grams, hardly about 5 to 10 grams. So you can imagine in a seizure of a 9-ton, how many thousands and put together how many millions of pangolins have been wiped out from this planet. In just, we are talking about these 2 or 3 years. So this is the volume of trade which occurs. Coming to the big cat species, I have put forward, you can see 4 reports on tigers, jaguars, snow leopards, and lions. None have been spared. None of these big cat species have been spared from the trade. And all of these are now fueling into the illegal wildlife market. The poachers, they go behind the bones, the skins, and are being marketed into the Eastern and the Southeast Asia's markets and the East Asia markets to feed the demand. And this is really threatening for these big cats because these are the apex predators which maintain the health of our ecosystems. And being on the top of the food chain, any kind of a ecological balance which would result in, after the removal of these big predators, would be a really havoc to that ecosystem. And we have seen what has happened in Cambodia. Tigers have been wiped out. Most of the forests in Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam have been silenced. So these are like silent forests. The moment these big cats are gone, then comes the prey and the other species are slowly getting wiped out. So this is a huge amount of trade, and a big threat to these big cats is still lurking around across the range, irrespective of the species. More to add fuel to this trade is also other activities. Now we have a climate change impact happening because of the deforestation, other habitat, land use pattern change, and this further accelerates the chances and also provides an ideal environment for these several wildlife diseases which are trapped into these ecological systems. You can see on a map on your screens on the right, these red areas, which are largely also coinciding areas for the big cats, are the highly threatened ecosystems presently across the globe today. And this is something very alarming, and we need to really take some strong policy decisions to avert any such future like pandemics, the situation which we are presently facing now. And unless we take very hard decisions and some great policy decisions to work on it, these big cats would not be there for long. And if this continues to go and the trade continues unrampant. Just to give you a recent example, I'm sure many of you are already aware the impact which the past diseases which have emerged as a result of from the wildlife, some form or the other, there's a connection either from illegal logging and exposing the forest and exposing these animals and coming in close contact with the humans, or because of the illegal wildlife trade, because of the wet market consumption, or because of other illegal dealings into the forest or land use pattern changes. And you can see these impacts were much more smaller to what we are facing now. And in future, if this continues, we don't know what this may transpire into. What I would like to draw your attention to is some of the policy actions which we might need to put into place, and collectively an institute like yours probably would take a lead into suggesting this to the global agencies you work with, CBD, UNDP, or the other UN organizations, and take it up to the highest level. Then there needs to be, I don't think so, I need to emphasize more on this, there cannot be a better time when we need to have an increased awareness in the health and the community, in general public. talking vis-a-vis with nature conservation. I don't think there has been a better time than this to give an importance and highlight the importance of nature conservation and why it is important for us to have these healthy ecosystems and basically conserve these large predators and their ranges across where they live. Increase efforts in surveillance and reporting of wildlife diseases. This is an area which seriously lacks and needs an attention, because we do get reportings of diseases maybe from the cities and other areas, but given the remoteness of most of the wildlife areas, we really don't get a very effective reporting on the wildlife diseases. And this is something, again, under your project ambit, you might be able to take it up and expand it to other areas. Increase research to elevate critical knowledge gaps in zoonotics. So this is, again, people are not really aware, and more research needs to be done. And still what has been done is little to feed the global knowledge and fill people on what are the still remedial ways to deal with these. Conservation epidemiology to inform risk-based surveillance and control of pathogens of zoonotic potential, deliver evidence-based health is an emerging field. And I think so this is something to be looked into. There might be a complete new avenue emerging out here for people to engage and help the planet. Strengthening the cooperation between the law enforcement agencies. When it comes to conservation, I think so conservation without borders is something which we would need to do and emphasize. And there cannot be a better time than now to emphasize on this. Because when I talk to people, I often say that the crimes do occur in wildlife areas, but the criminals do not reside in wildlife areas. They are residing outside. So you need multiple agency collaboration to fight this illegal wildlife crime, or even to fight this kind of an emergence of pandemics, which is closely related to nature and wildlife. So you will need the help of multiple agencies to work with. Limiting the potential of viral transmission and amplification in the markets, we need good number of market surveys to be conducted. We really don't know, and when this crisis struck us, you must have seen there was a upsurge and suddenly kind of an evolution of number of articles and number of news coming out that we have seen in wildlife markets. These are the species which are found, but then slowly the curve goes down and the business starts to come as usual. We need to go and start and establish and encourage countries where wildlife markets exist, especially in East and Southeast Asia, where there's a huge amount of consumption of wildlife, even in Africa, some parts in Latin America, that there has to be some kind of a system put in place within the countries to constantly monitor these markets and also have a surveillance system to basically map and risks what exists there. Some kind of early warning systems needs to be there. And this can only happen with bringing much more effective kind of proactive policies in place. Not just basically putting down on words and putting down in reports, but making this happen through bilateral cooperation, taking it to the forums like CBD and the UN, where it is mandated through different other channels, partnering with other health agencies to help, and we will have to re-examine conservation interventions with a complete new lens. So this is what I foresee, and possibly as a proposed outcome, I would say that the findings of this seminar or the webinar should go up as a joint declaration which could come out globally in the UN or CBD. In the upcoming CBD, when we have next year, the CBD is already being planned, the COP, the country should be encouraged to come up with a proposed kind of a joint declaration to fight against such diseases or pandemics, and a legislation to put in place where we can see the reforming of and strengthening around the wildlife markets. So this is something very essential which we will need to achieve, and possibly forums like this can help us to progress towards those. definitely the other side of which we need to work, and there are different organizations like Traffic and many other global organizations which are working, is the reduction of demand and the consumption. Definitely this remains as one of the key areas, but at the same time, we also need to strengthen the protection on the source sides, the supplying countries where much of the snaring and poaching happens. So this has to go hand in hand. There is also a lot of work which is being carried out globally on understanding the behavior. And there have been now, at least in the recent years, one good thing has happened is there has been a lot of research work which is taken into the behavioral change of the consumption of wildlife. And this is definitely, again, Traffic is one organization which has taken a lead in this and has been taking this further ahead. So I will stop here on this before I go on to the second part. If there are any burning questions, I would like, if you would like me to take up. You are muted, Dr. Puneet.
Oh, I think you should continue with your presentation. We can take the questions in the little part. That will be better.
Okay.
We have a lot of questions, but they are mixed between your second part and the first part.
Okay, fair enough. So I will move to my second part of my presentation, which is talk to you and share some work which we have carried out on COVID-19 impact on the big cat conservation. As I said early in my talk, my results, though, are very specific to tiger conservation areas, but they will not be very different and to other big cat conservation areas. COVID-19 has disrupted biodiversity, the policy, and the global agenda. We have seen how big conservation meetings, conservation planning, and even economic planning across the globe has been taken for a toss. It's completely forced us to rethink how do we live on this planet? How do we really do and perform, and our actions, what we do, what impact they have on this planet, and the businesses that takes place on this planet, what is their impact, and can we continue to continually exploit the planet the way we are doing? So there are some serious questions it has thrown back to us, and that rethinking at least has brought back the conservation agenda on the forefront. And as I said earlier, there has been no better time than this to talk about and realize and populate and talk to and communicate to the civil society and to the policymakers and others involved in the business about the conservation agenda, why it is important for us to take care of natural assets and conservation, and how businesses can also benefit by doing that. So there have been a lot of publications which have come out, which have looked into this. We also saw the first news which emerged related to the big cats as an evidence was from WCS, and we saw from the US, from the Bronx Zoo, where the tigers got infected with COVID. But after that, it was established, and the report which was released said that given the apparent low susceptibility of felids to the virus, the mild clinical signs displayed by infected or presumed infected tigers and the lions at the Bronx Zoo, and the low likelihood that it can become established in the wild cat populations in nature, it is unlikely that COVID-19 represents a threat to the cats in the wild. But in my opinion, this is probably too early, and the time will tell us, because if it goes and what happens and how much it is likely to be a threat to other big cats, we don't know. Because here was a case of a zoo which proactively tested its animals. There are many captive facilities, even there are tigers in the tiger farms illegally being kept across several places in Asia, and where we haven't even carried out such tests, and we don't know what kind of reports even would be there. So I would say that this is an area which probably your institute can take up And there's a huge number of tiger farms existing in Southeast Asia and East Asia, and where you can extend your expertise and possibly plan a new project to conduct a huge scan of these big cats which are in captivity. And maybe that will be a good way to find out if what are the results there. Well, what we wanted to understand was how this is impacting conservation, and especially the big cat conservation which we are involved in. And we had some general questions in mind. We wanted to know, because this brought life to a standstill, so how does the patrolling will go now? Or surveillance will happen in protected areas? What are the country level impacts beyond this? Because the economies were getting impacted. How does the impact internal conservation work? Because many areas, because of the social distancing and the measures put in place, we could not carry out monitoring of those areas. So there's a huge amount of disruption into ecological monitoring which was brought in. And ecological monitoring in many areas came to a standstill. How do we communicate with the donors during these blackout periods with still keep them engaged in funding? So this shouldn't be seen as a blackout area, and donors shouldn't see that conservation is now not possible or challenged, but rather than this is an opportunity to bring in positive funding into the conservation and help and mobilize funding for health, for education into those areas which are remote, work with indigenous communities, local communities, and maybe possibly better integrate them into the whole process. So this is also the times of turning these challenges into opportunities. So these are some of the other things which we were trying to look into and get answers. What safeguards for communities involved in assisting? You will understand that across the globe, not all the parks have the luxury to have a large amount of staff to basically patrol and maintain the parks. There's a huge amount of staff which is hired on a contractual basis. So like in the fire season, we get a whole amount of local communities, and that is also an incentive to the surrounding communities inside these or in the neighborhood of these protected areas as an employment. They come and work in the fire season. They come and work in the grass cutting season when the grasses are high. They come and work for assistance as teams to provide assisting hands in terms of patrolling. So there are several things as a means of livelihood also and generating income for these local communities. So what does it mean for them? What will be the impact on the park due to community income failing? This is something, and the tourism. Tourism has a huge direct as well as indirect impact and incentives it gives to. So what is going to happen when there is no tourism going to happen, and it has not taken place in the last 1 year, and we don't see it happening in another 1 year. So what is going to happen? Can safeguard measures be put in place? What kind of safeguard measures we would require? What are the new innovative ways of working would be required to keep the conservation going, to keep the wheels of the conservation is still moving, and still have the security to these natural areas? The burn rate and the budgets, because the countries are facing so much of distress, economic distress, we want to ensure that the conservation budgets are not mobilized into other sectors. So they are equally important, and the park receiving a budget, there should not be a cut in the funding there. So that is equally important to be maintained. What is the social stress on the rangers? Because here we have to understand, like the people in the army who work on borders, we have the rangers patrolling the national parks and the sanctuaries and natural areas, and they're remaining for several days and months away from the family. Obviously, there would be a huge amount of social stress, and we would have experienced now. Many of you would have realized, because earlier when we used to talk about welfare of rangers, people didn't used to have that kind of a connect. But I'm sure this pandemic has made many of us realize what isolation means, what stress it can throw, what is the mental stress and the capacity you go through under when you are put into a kind of a house arrest and you are away from the family and your near or dear ones, your friends. So imagine these people in the park, they're completely under the lockdown, they are doing their jobs, protecting areas. At the same time, they don't have the privilege to go and visit the families because of the social distancing and other laws put in place. Huge influx of the people from around the cities moving into the protected areas. We saw a huge amount of migration of the labor which used to work in factories, in different other works, employed in major cities or small towns, moving back to their remote villages. And many of these areas are in close vicinity with the protected areas. Now, there is a certain amount of pressure these protected areas were being subjected to now for collection of firewood or other NTFP, non-timber forest produce, people going for other things. And there is also maybe a demand for other hunting. There's also poaching might increase. Human wildlife interactions obviously would be high in given situations. And so in the last would be the health issues. And again, the wildlife trade and health issues would become a prime importance during these times. So this survey was carried out with the Conservation Assured Tiger Standards, which is a project which is run and implemented across the tiger range. This is the first of its kind conservation standards which have been designed to assess site-based tiger conservation. So it's an equivalent, if I have to put it in a normal layman terms, like ISO 9000s and 2000s, which you have for different standards in the business. So these are gold standards for tiger conservation. And any area which aspires and achieves these standards, we could for certain say that that area has a longevity for tiger conservation in years to come. So, and CATS is now a global partnership, which is of more than 13 different organizations, ranging from IUCN WCPA, the WCS, the Global Wildlife Conservation, there is Wild Team, FFI, GWC, then we have the UNDP, and we have the other government, all the tiger range government organizations, the Free Land from Thailand, and there are also other organizations, Panthera, working with us. So all the big cat organizations which work on the big cat conservation have been partnering with us. We also had another partner with us, the Ranger Federation of Asia and WWF. And we looked into this during the time of the pre-COVID, or when the COVID was just emerging out as a global threat. And we wanted to understand what kind of conservation challenges it throws. We had 110 responses from 12 countries, and largely from Nepal, Bhutan, India, Malaysia, and Russia. And looking at 73% of the respondents were government or PA managers and the field staff. So looking at the patrolling, if we looked at the patrol coverage, 32% of the cases on the PA have new additional responsibilities. So suddenly what we started seeing at was that these rangers or the guards in the forested areas were not only responsible now for patrolling these areas, but also some of them were being pulled out to be put on borders, or where the parks were bordering neighboring countries, they were put out on border patrols for community health checkpoints. So suddenly there was a loss of staff being driven for some other work or additional responsibility, or bringing in more stress of job for these guards additionally to look into. 10% of the PAs had enforcement staff cuts. So they had to reduce down the enforcement staff. 20% had temporary reductions in the staff salaries. So in some parts in Asia, the salaries on the contractual staff were suddenly not available, and they had to cut down on those salaries. Then we looked at some of the ranger welfare issues. So 60% of the PAs have some kind of a disruption or the other because of the lockdown. Now situation has started to emerge towards slightly, I would not say we would never be normal. So let's completely understand the normal of yesterday, the normal will never going to come back. So whatever better situation is happening now, but during the major time, there has been a severe impact on the supplies. And this has really put further stress on conservation areas and the people and the monitoring happening there. And the PPE being provided, most of them would have to manage on their own. Protected area management staff was being provided in most cases, but as far as the communities were concerned, and they had to be pulled out of the parks. So we could have no more the luxury of employing the communities or providing additional hands to the staff to patrol in these areas. So they had to be also bearing the cost of buying these equipments. So there have been no consistent evidence of the threat. So there have been, I would say, ups and downs. There have been some places in Latin America, like they started reporting a very high amount of logging in areas. In Brazil, in Latin America, and jaguar areas, in those areas. Some of the tiger areas in Southeast Asia faced a similar thing, but others not. In terms of, as I said, minor forest produce collection, there was a lot of NTFP being collected, non-timber forest produce, people coming, because as there was a huge amount of influx of people coming into these areas, they started collecting these small materials for their daily needs and the use. Poaching of a species have seen both up and down in places. Obviously, because of the lockdown, because of the control of the people, poachers had little chance to move around. And if they would do so, they would get detected. So there was in areas where there were tight border controls, we saw complete lockdown happening, and there were changes, there were some positive changes in the wildlife sightings. Elsewhere, where the border guards have been pulled out and there have been less people manning the park, there were some certain reporting cases of poaching being brought out. And we saw a report which came out from Traffic India highlighting some of the issues of the cases, and in some places, high number of poaching happening because of this COVID-19 period that they were there. Poaching of the other prey animals, yes, some areas reported, and they reported on the prey because that, as I said, for the consumption and people started getting lured into the forest for hunting, may not necessarily be for large amount of illegal trade, but even for the domestic and localized hunting started happening, and some places did start reporting that. 40% of the respondents suggested filing cases and actions were really difficult because of the social distancing, because if people were apprehended, they could not be taken to the courts, and because of the risk and of the disease being contaminated, it was a huge amount of a risk, and there was this risk of getting the disease. There was a reduction in the number of arrests or other filing of cases were there. Because of that, we saw some places reported a reduced amount of action happening into the wildlife enforcement. Some activities which have been halted were definitely community engagement definitely came to a major halt, as no longer the communities could be directly involved into the conservation because of the various measures and the risk which would be there otherwise to the communities. And especially the rural communities or indigenous communities in these areas, they are very vulnerable. And you would know that they are vulnerable to any kind of external diseases. So that also distanced, and that impacted a huge amount of work in the monitoring. The biological monitoring obviously got impacted in many areas, but not to an extent where it became severe. So there was intermittently some monitoring happening across the areas, and it has started to pick up as I speak to you now. It has started to pick up across most of the tiger range and other big cat areas. We are hearing those news from the field. Habitat management, again, to a varying degree. So depending on where we could, so places where there had been highly dependent on secondary staff or additional community staff, that has been impacted. but where there has been directly habitat being monitored by the employed staff, those still continue to do so, and as they were doing it. But no external further projects were getting mobilized for any of the monitoring or habitat work now in this situation. We did hear some decrease in budgets in Bhutan, Cambodia, India in parts, in Nepal and Malaysia. And it is yet to be seen now how this in the next fiscal year would be, actual impact would be seen then. Because now the countries have started to assess their economic impacts. And in the next financial year would be crucial for conservation to ensure that we don't face any further budget cuts. Because that is going to be the key for us to keep these areas up and running. Majority of the respondents, though, were pessimistic about the future budget allocations and felt that ability to effectively manage the protected areas well will be compromised, were some people said. But then there have been now new ways and tools being suggested how we could really actively maintain these areas looking at. But these are some of the reflections which people gave us from the field. And this is to just share that what kind of people think in different ways and different regions. We had different reflections coming out from the people, from people engaging in conservation, and they were sharing with us. Well, as of impacts in general, to talk about globally on protected areas and big cat conservation, obviously economic impacts, as I said, loss of significant income in the protected and conserved areas and communities, reduced revenues and the budgets, conservancies and community-based areas particularly impacted. And there would be direct ecological impacts, and this would start to show up by the next year. So we would get to know where, and especially in areas which are high risk for non-human primates, especially in our region, like for orangutans, or looking at others in Africa, where we have the other large primates. Management and enforcement impacts, I talked about this quite in detail. So this is something which we need to look for in future, and we would need to keep it. Visitation, this is definitely impacted across the globe. Tourism has come and has taken one of the biggest brunt. And this has also sparked a new discussion, because earlier, for every solution, there used to be, oh, you do tourism, tourism provides incentive, and that is the best way of income to the parks. But probably post-COVID, that is not the financial model which people would want to look into. So there are people looking into new financial models and mechanisms, carbon credits, into impact bonds. People are looking into other conservation permanent financing schemes. So there are other green climate funds. So there are other ways of looking at funding these protected areas or large areas where even these big cats live. Resource management impacts. So how do we really carry out? So this is another impact which we will have to work on to. Social and community impacts I just talked about. Policy changes at the national and the regional level. We will have to start now aligning and readjusting our policies, so that in future we take into account all of this and have a risk mitigation plan for such situations. If there was another second wave, then what we will do? Then what are the things in places and checks and balances required? I think so one of the core principles which we need to understand is a symptom of a wider environmental crisis. We must commit and act to achieve a healthy, sustainable planet. These big cat areas and the areas they inhabit provide broad benefits. I think so this is a time to make people realize the benefits through the nature conservation and the areas where these big cats live. The benefits, which is much more larger than these big cat issues. Understanding how the corruption is accelerating the logging and deforestation during COVID-19, as I said. So these are some of the things which we will need to look into and make people realize. Now, there are a couple of scenarios, let me put in front of you very quickly. And not just for big cats, but in general also for larger conservation areas. A return to normal, as I said, when I say return to normal, is not the normal of yesterday, but definitely a return to normal of something better than what we have experienced in the last 7 to 8 months. Medical breakthrough makes this transit crisis. We may have a vaccine. Some environmental social challenges remain unaddressed, delay in implementation, underfunding that might happen. What happens if the global economic depression and the decline in conservation? You might have even further impacts, further destruction, and for environmental regulations, economic growth at any cost would be all impacted. Looking at the third, which is a much more better and more practical scenario, is a new and a transformative relationship with nature. This is what we should try to work for. Shift in the humanity's perception, work for that, and a relationship, protected and conserved areas central to economic recovery. So how protected areas are really instrumental in the recovery, and they should be a part. I think so there's a lesson which has been taught to the businesses that if you destroy too much of these protected areas, what the impact would be. Earlier, they not used to be a direct visible. Now, I don't think so businesses need much more visible impact than this to be seen. What happens if the nature is destroyed? Higher ambition and goal in the agenda for nature and the climate. And this is again to the various policy forums, which are collaborators to this webinar, and we take it up to that level to talk about that. Improved ecological health, reduce the risk for further pandemics, and this is what we are all striving through as a collaborative way to work further. So there is a three-way plan which has been now introduced. I'm a part of a World Task Force which has been constituted under the IUCN World Conservation Commission on Protected Areas. And this is what has been suggested, that we move from a rescue to recover and then rebuild. This is how we would take the conservation across the three phases. Presently, the time is to maintain what we have, provide an injection through accelerator funding, keep the momentum, maintain what the monitoring we are doing, so that by the time we move into the recover phase, we start promoting and start creating larger partnerships and doing restoration and other for capacity building for these areas and the species conservation. And eventually start to rebuild in a way that we could avoid any such pandemics. Address high-risk wildlife trade, which I said in the beginning in the first part of my presentation. Innovative ways of funding. Looking at genetics for decoding zoonotics. And the role of genetics comes very much on the forefront here. And I think so looking at the genomics and the zoonotics together to work, there could have not have been a better timing to take this field further to help us in strengthening that. The wider global efforts, collect and analyze further information, I would say, and this is what we are doing now through the task force to understand the COVID-19 impact on conservation and also big cats and the other protected areas. Influence the global policy for investment. Keep influencing the policies through different channels that we need to continue to invest in these protected areas and why it is necessary, absolutely, to invest in these areas. And something which has really come to the forefront and we are very strongly promoting is the One Health approach to maintain healthy ecosystems to the governments, sectoral ministries, companies, human rights groups, and others bring together through this One Health approach, everybody together to work. And as I said, application of genomics to do the mapping and building risk models. I think so this is something which your institute can take up as a project in the coming years and start to map up as a risk mapping across these big cat ranges. And this would really help in visualizing and putting measures in place for the other big cats across the globe. I will stop here and thank you very much. So if there are questions, I'm happy to take those questions and deal with those. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Pastor Shah, for your very nice, elaborative presentation. It was very informative for all of us. So we can start with our discussion. So Professor Lee, you have the questions?
I'll take some questions from the chatting, but Dr. Pandy, could you start discussion with panels first?
Okay. So let's open up a discussion among our panelists. So I'll just talk about some big issues. But while I was just looking at your presentation, it was really very nice, informative presentation. When we find it out that there was a increase in patrolling activities across the PS, approximately 40%. And also there was like a decrease in number of staff. And then the results of the findings of this survey shows that there was an inconsistency in the number of illegal activities that are happening inside the protected area. Is it not something related to one another, that if we are overburdening the forest staff, which we know they have some issues like they are already overburdened. So with this increased overburden, even though you do a patrolling, but actually that patrolling will not be efficient. So maybe this should come out as a recommendation.
Yes, but there are countries, as I said, during this time of uncertain times, countries were hard pressed with the capacity even to border control. And there were certain areas like in Bhutan, between India and Bhutan, the borders are there. The Bhutan is such a small country where they already have a very limited human resource capacity. And to maintain their borders and to ensure that they had effective border control measures, because it's such a porous border all across, they had to burden these forest staff additionally. But yes, I do understand, and that is the reason you see those inconsistencies in areas where the forest staff has been put onto other additional duties. This is a huge stress for them. So that is why, as I said, the other remedial measure could have been that they could have hired community, extra hands, but given the social distancing measures, given the risk involvement to the communities, obviously they were also challenged from that kind of a even privilege. So that is the reason we see. But yes, I think so the recommendation should be that especially these areas which are protected areas should be seen as essential areas, and the staff from there should not be pulled out and put into other services. We see many a times that in our region, especially in South Asia, when the elections come, people are pulled out for election duties, and especially these are the staff. When they think, oh, these are staff sitting in the forest, what serious business they can have to do? Let's take them out and put them. But probably they have much more serious business to do, and as much serious as the people on the borders, like army people are doing it and safeguarding our borders, they are safeguarding our natural assets. And they have an equally important business, and they should not be pulled into other ancillary jobs, and that should be one of the recommendations, definitely yes.
So Dr. Thakur, Mukesh Thakur.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Puneet, Dr. Hangli, for organizing such a wonderful webinar. I have been associated with their agendas and activities they have been conducting on big cat conservations. Is a very good initiative to bring all the expertise on board and to understand the COVID impact on big cat conservation. I congratulate Dr. Pasha for a very informative presentation, and it was really wonderful to have an insight of the illegal wildlife trade and how he has mentioned the different species which are involved and their how it has affected their local consumptions and the trade. I, in Geological Survey of India, is taking charge of wildlife forensic activities, and my major is conservation genetics, and I do so many conservation activities at JDSI. And just want to have a one clarification with Dr. Pasha, as he mentioned, like several wildlife diseases also, they get silently introduced to one country from where they are not originally found earlier. I mean, this could be the invasive species as well. So I have a pretty good experience. One of the experience I would like to share here, and then I would have a question also. I keep receiving this forensic cases, illegal seizures. So when I was looking for the pangolin seizure closely, all the seized scales, and because I go for the species identification and sometimes also for the individual identification, I mean, how many pangolins has been killed in a seizure. So while observing scales very closely, I found several ticks attached to those scales. And these scales we have received, one of the case I'm sharing from Siliguri part. So, and there is no data as such in the country for the ticks. So they can be hard ticks, they can be soft ticks. So I found that was a hard tick. So we have done the DNA barcoding also and the SAM analysis also, and then we land up, it was a Amblyoptera javensis, one of the tick species which has not been reported from Chinese pangolin earlier. So yes, there are chances and there are incidences where several not even ticks but other fungal, bacterial, even mites get transferred from one region to another region and even among the continents. Because pangolin, which is protected all across the continent, African pangolins, I got a few cases where even in India, African pangolin has been caught. So and even the as Dr. Pasha also mentioned, there are live animals are being traded. So I would like to share here in Kolkata, one animal, one case was seized along with a live lion cub. And then we were asked to identify whether it's a Asiatic or African loin. So this is a kind of scenario of illegal wildlife trade. My questions to Dr. Pasha is there any sort of database available where you have this, listing of the wildlife diseases that has been transferred through the trading? Because several species which is not known to occur in country, now they are appearing. And one of the example, like, yeah, can you mention about any database? I mean, the wildlife database, disease database that is available by any chance? I mean, traffic or any organization has made a catalog on this. I'm talking about only the disease which is being transmitted through the legal trade.
So I haven't seen a centralized database. I've come across a few publications which you would have come across too, emerging from China and Southeast Asia, which have listed certain diseases which have been found from the wildlife and could be possibly transmitted to humans and contacts. And that is why in my call I said that it would be good that an institute like this, where Dr. Puneet is working, starts to map up this kind of a risk mapping for wildlife diseases. I haven't seen a publication till now which comes as a comprehensive publication and says, well, this is what we have as epicenters of different wildlife diseases. This is the kind of the risk profiling across different taxa, and this is what we would be looking. So ideally, this is the kind of a work with institutes or like your institutions, ZSI or others involved into this genetics can take it forward. I'm not definitely aware of this.
And one more, worries, as you well explained.
Maybe Dr. Joshi can also comment on this issue because he is a veterinarian, I think. Dr. Joshi, have you came across any such database available for wildlife disease? Because you have one annual conference in India, I remember, of all the veterinarians where you present all the cases related to wildlife disease and other things reported.
Dr. Joshi, I think you have to unmute your mic.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Pandey, for inviting me here in this webinar. First of all, regards to Hangley sir, professor, and my friend Mukesh sir, hello. And Khalid Pasha sir, presentation was very nice. I really enlightened to see his presentation and information he has shared. And very thankful to all organizers. The specifically database I have not came across in any books or any, but different literatures are available, and we have seen in Google Scholar different country has made their own disease. Say for example, Netherlands has published one database for emerging diseases, and Spain, even European countries are working on good on this database. In India, actually, I have not come across the diseases, emerging diseases about. So I agree with Pasha sir that there should be a need to be compile all the information to in one place of database. And one more question, my query I would say to Hangley sir or Pasha sir, that although there is no evidence of spreading of the disease to animal to human, actually the disease comes from wet market to human. Now it has been spreading globally. And in Netherlands, in May, the mink fur farm got infection from the farm workers. And then after shutting down the farm, mink farm, again 2 workers got infection from the mink. So if you see the spreading wet market to people, people to farm animals, and farm animals to worker, it means there is any possibility to come back to the people again, this virus, because if it could happen, it's very dangerous to all the community. So what is your opinion about that? Khalid sir, please.
Professor Lee?
Oh, it's asking me.
Both of
Sorry.
Because actually I haven't seen any evidence, written evidence about the spreading of the disease. But if you see the case of the Netherlands mink farm,
Yeah.
they're shutting down the mink farm. Actually, the spread from farm worker to the mink, and after shutting down the farm, the workers again got infection from the mink. So the cases, it is possible that the virus come back from animal to people after spreading globally. So what's your opinion about that?
Actually, I was thinking about the possibility. Probably most susceptible wildlife at this time would be bats and carnivores and primates. Maybe some of the rodents. But at this time, I think there is no concrete evidence or knowledge about which animal species or taxon is susceptible and can transmit or circulate in their wild population. And someday they may develop a new strain, and humans can catch them instantly. There is possibility, but we don't have no concrete data about this. So I think the best way is we should take very caution when dealing with wildlife, including ourselves,
Yeah.
the researchers and the rangers of wildlife. And we need to caution and take awareness to the people that we should be cautious of dealing with any kind of wildlife at this time.
Biosecurity measures we should.
I would like to share one thing in this same context. After the observing one case in Bronx Zoo where tiger has been infected by COVID.
Yeah.
In India, what has happened? The Central Zoo Authority, they have issued a letter to all the state zoo authorities to check all their carnivores for the COVID infections. So my institute, as we are a part of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, we also received some of the requests from zoo authorities that whether JSI can help in screening the carnivores for the occurrence of the COVID. So they wanted to test whether these animals are infected or not, or susceptible or not. So I see so many concern has been raised by different authorities, zoo authorities, to check their animals. But is there any effort that has been really taken? I mean, is the, on ground whether we know the results? I mean, after the Bronx Zoo, probably in UK and US, might be some of the animals or the large cats might have been screened. But I don't know any case, at least from Asia, where even people has tested the animal. It is okay. Concern has raised by everyone. We also have a concern. Like we also think like primates or the all those animals which share the which share their habitat or stay in the vicinity of the human habitations might be susceptible. But is there any testing has been done on ground level? Because these are veterinary aspects, and we don't deal in screening the virus assessment. Though I thought to undertake exercise based on the PCR assay, so I even develop a qPCR protocol for, and I designed certain markers also by which we can screen the animals. But we do not have the state of art laboratory for dealing the pathogen. So we then the institute authority says not to get involved in this. Reason being, we have the facilities for the PCR and the sequencing, but dealing the virus or the pathogen, we don't have the quarantine facilities. But I want to know, because you are dealing such a big project under CBD, and you have an approach in Far East Asia and Russia, and working in different other countries as well, Bangladesh. And so is there any, on ground level, is there any testing has been done for the animals in captivity?
So, we haven't heard, that's why I said in my talk, we haven't, except for Bronx Zoo, where actively big cats were tested out. We heard some few cases. Obviously, India passed in a couple of states. It was not nationally, but certain states did carry out, certain zoos did something, but not, it was not like a globally, all the cats were tested out everywhere. And there is a huge amount of area, which is, when I'm talking about, is tiger farms. And tiger farms in China, in East Asia, in Laos, Vietnam. These are the areas where definitely you would require to do a massive testing of these we don't know, and we haven't heard such a large scale testing. And probably because also, since it involves a high amount of resources, nobody have even attempted and thought about doing that. So maybe that is something, I'm not an expert. There are several other experts sitting here and maybe participating on this call who would know that what are the kind of resources which would be needed to test at a global scale, and what we are talking about, and how quickly could we do that, and what is the advantage. And that's why I mentioned that this is something which could be taken up by the institute and looking at as one of the recommendations to doing that and mapping of these.
So I know there is a program by WCS, is a one word one health program, and specifically dedicated to test the wild animals being in captivity or in they are free ranging. So I think this is a good platform where we can pitch on the subjects, and it should be, if no efforts has been done so far. Maybe this could be one of the recommendations where we can pitch on, like if we can have a mass testing for at least for the captive animal, because they are the resource for any wildlife. So I think this One Health, One World program should definitely be.
That's what exactly just now I posted in the chat box, what you were saying. And that is what I have posted as a recommendation, that it should be as a One Health approach, should be taken. And that is why I am saying, somebody asked from Bangladesh saying, what is One Health and why and how should it be? It's closer to conservation. So when we are talking about diseases now, is not limited to cities and just to human populations. There is a both way now process. And until unless we understand the two-way process, we are not going to resolve this, and we might see more crises emerging in future. So to have a better understanding and a much streamlining the process in future, we need to have that One Health approach.
So,
excuse me.
Yeah, please, Hamdi, go ahead.
Yeah, because we are approaching the time limit, we originally planned 1 and 30 minutes, now 4:26. So I think we need to take at least one question from audiences. So let me do that. There are so many questions from audiences, so probably we cannot introduce all of them, but there's one consistent questions, three questions that is connected. So I introduced that. One was, do we have the knowledge about any specific class of consumers of these wildlife products? And the second is, what are the most used routes of transporting wildlife parts from the countries where they are poached to the countries they are sold? And third one, who are the main consumers of illegal wildlife products? Any study on it? Dr. Pasha, could you answer these connected questions?
Yes, Dr. Lee. I think so. I can answer in one answer for all these three questions.
Okay.
One is all of you who are interested in knowing more about wildlife trade. First of all, I will encourage you to visit the website of Traffic International. And when I say that, this is something, an organization which works largely on the wildlife trade issues. So that is one thing where you definitely should go, and you can find most of the material available on wildlife trade. Coming to the consumption, much of the consumption of wildlife happens in Southeast Asia and East Asia, but there is a bushmeat consumption in Latin America and Africa also. The trade routes, again, Traffic is working with the customs, the aviation, the other industries to map, and they called a project, it's called the Routes with Interpol. And there is for different regions, different species, there are different routes which are mapped. So there is a lot of study which is being done. Thirdly, on the behavioral issue, this is a subject which I mentioned, which is being very much in focus, and people are working on it. Again, there's a lot of material, me rather going into the detail. If you go onto this site, which I've just posted, you might be, you will definitely, not might, you will definitely get a lot of resource material with different kind of subjects, which just Professor Lee mentioned, whether you talk about consuming wildlife, trade routes, or also about what are the mitigative measures and other things, and what parts are being traded.
Hey, thank you so much. Now it's 4:30, so I think we can officially close the session. But if somebody has time to some more discussion, the remaining can people can leave, but the remaining people can continue discussion. Dr. Pashak, do you have some more time?
Maybe we can use another 5 minutes we can have, and then 5 to 10 minutes. Yes, I can, and then I will have to jump for another.
Okay. Any participants who should leave can leave now. But if you leave some questions, we can discuss it further, and the remaining people can continue more discussions.
Yeah, Dr. Mukesh,
Okay.
about to say something.
Yeah.
Okay.
So should we go on for discussion, or we should wait till other participants leave the portal?
No, that's okay. At least for 5 minutes, we can continue a discussion. Because it's going
So I have a quick question to Dr. Hangli.
Mm-hmm.
It's regarding the panplex. It is a very beautiful concept. Panplex can, characterize all the big cats, and I hope this would be commercially available as well, because again there would be a problem of standardizing the samples and genotyping reactions if doing separately.
I think we can discuss this in October 22 webinar specifically for that thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to have one. I'm not going into the dynamics of the panplex. Just want to share that there is a kit available called Test My Cat DNA. Test My Cat DNA, which has been used as a similar concept, and it has certain QTL also that can characterize the diseases as well. So I really wish, like, if your panplex come up like a Test My Cat DNA kit, so that it would be widely used and a complementary data can be generated all across the ranges.
As Dr. Punit mentioned, we will have a detailed discussion plan in the last session. I will discuss with Dr. Punit about your suggestion, and probably we can discuss in detail at that time. At this time, our topic is mainly focused on COVID-19 issues. So,
okay.
Like
thank you.
During the discussion, it was mentioned that about the threats to the big cats and monitoring. I would just want to highlight one issue. As we know, Dr. Mukesh will agree that big cats are actually having a low genetic diversity. And in case of the cheetah in Africa, it has been shown that even the skin graft is possible among the individuals. So that means their immunity is highly suppressed. So if you have a suppressed immunity, the issue related to these epidemics, COVID spread and everything, we may lead to a lot of diseases and mortalities also in future. So one needs to, really there is an urgent need of monitoring of all those COVID infections in big cats, specifically in the zoos where their genetic diversity is already highly compromised. Now coming back to the Dr. Joshi's question, what he was trying to mention about is just switching over one host to the another. Like we know, if we clearly understand what WHO says, that the COVID virus actually has moved from bat to a one intermediary host, and it become more virulent and starts spreading in humans. Now it is moving in another direction to the animals. So again a host jump, and again a host jump, it may lead to a more virulent strain or may lead to a decreased infection rate or the lethality. And in future it can again jump. So it's a kind of a, if the virus has a possibility of jumping. So I would just like to ask Dr. Mukesh, because I remember recently you did some study on the haplotypes of COVID-19 across India. So you got a lot of COVID-19 haplotypes variations that, and there are many studies available now also on the different haplotypes or the variations available in COVID-19 strains. So is there any correlation between, because to best of my knowledge, I can say that if the any vector changes or the disease spreading agent changes host, its impact or its lethality reduces to a greater extent. It gets compromised. So is there any kind of information available about COVID-19?
Please see a background, if you can see a virtual background behind me.
Yeah, this reminds me of talking about this.
So basically, this is nothing but we have mapped the COVID variants which was available in India up to the March 2020. So in just last, I mean, early 1 year of 1 month of spread of COVID in India. So we found these many haplotypes, different variants. So what we have actually analyzed and found up to the March 2020, we got 198 variants in India. And COVID-19 is very highly evolving virus, and it changes their mutant every 15 days. So just imagine how many different mutants have been spreaded and widespread in the country.
Spreading of mutants is okay, and the variation is okay.
So I'm coming to the question you have asked. So basically, we also mapped the prevalence and the transmission rate specific to the different mutants. So we try to find whether there any specific mutant which has a more prevalence and transmission, and maybe more lethality as well. So we know the COVID, as everybody knows in the world, that it has been transmitted through bats, through a penguin as an intermediate host. And Dr. Heman Joshi, what he has mentioned is very relevant. Like, it can go back to the animal again. A new strain may go back to the animals again. Is again a matter of research. People has not analyzed this in that particular context. But this virus is hypervariable, and I believe there are now thousands of mutants are available already all across the globe. So different scientists and evolutionary biologists, they are studying COVID evolutions. And if you have been reading the Lancet journal, they have identified certain mutants, for example, 1D614G, which is highly prevalent in entire Europe and is very virulent. So I would say is an open area of research. Everybody's analyzing and working, researching, and being one of the scientists being involved closely with the COVID spread in the country. And I was very much interested to analyze animal as well for the COVID. But
let's take a remark from Dr. Pasha.
No, I just had something else to talk about. And I was just saying that since I heard Professor Lee's presentation and hearing to what, I don't want to disrupt Dr. Mukesh, because hearing to you, I get more scared. Looking at 100+ more mutants and the virulency of this virus and the ability to mutate such fast way, this is further scaring us. But a quick question to, but rather a suggestion to both Dr. Puneet and Dr. Hang Lee, that since we have been doing this CATS project across the Tiger Range, I probably after this seminar and maybe sometime later after your webinars, I would see this as a good opportunity to collaborate across the protected areas if we could work with you to map some of the threats for the big cats across the Tiger Range to begin with as a project, because I see that you are closely working with the Land of the Leopard, where Dr. Yuri Dharman, he used to be my colleague in WWF, is the director now. I have visited, I have been fortunate to see the entire landscape in the Russia Far East, to travel across that landscape and work in Sikhatolin and Land of the Leopard and Beacon and those areas.
Just now completed the all genetics of the tigers and leopards of Land of Leopard, and will be sharing all the findings in subsequent presentations.
But in a wider way, if there is an opportunity, I would be keen to collaborate from our side on the CATS partnership with your institute. And so that is something which before I leave this platform, I wanted to extend that and then maybe do a risk mapping for tigers in the
Sure.
longer run.
So with this, all these comments, we would like to end this session. It was a really nice, informative session, I must say, and it was a good beginning to start our webinar series in this pandemic situation where everyone is working remotely. So you can see on the same floor, me and Professor Lee both are sitting, but in the different rooms, all because of this pandemic. Otherwise, we would have sit together to enjoy your fabulous presentation. Thanks, Dr. Joshi and Dr. Mukesh, for being a part of the panel. And I would also like to thank all our participants who joined us today. Some of the questions have not been addressed, so I'll request them. So we'll send you all the replies to their questions by email, because we have all your email IDs. So we'll send you the replies. And please join us on October 8th for our next webinar, which will be talking where we'll be talking about the reintroduction of the tigers in India, the first tiger reintroduction, and how the tiger and leopard population was restored in Land of Leopard National Park. Remember, this is the last surviving hope for the Amur leopard, the critically endangered species. With all of these words, I would like to end. Thank you all. Thanks for being part of it. Bye. See you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was lovely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.